in which the Quiquendonians adopt a heroic resolution. We have seen to what a deplorable condition the people of Quiquendone were reduced. Their heads were in a ferment. They no longer knew or recognized themselves. The most peaceable citizens had become quarrelsome. If you looked at them askance, they would speedily send you a challenge. Some let their mustaches grow, and several, the most belligerent, curled them up at the ends. This being their condition, the administration of the town and the maintenance of order in the streets became difficult tasks, for the government had not been organized for such a state of things. The burgomaster, that worthy Van Trichas, whom we have seen so placid, so dull, so incapable of coming to any decision, the burgomaster became intractable. His house resounded with the sharpness of his voice. He made 20 decisions a day, scolding his officials and himself enforcing the regulations of his administration. Ah, what a change! The amiable and tranquil mansion of the burgomaster, that good Flemish home, where was its former calm? What changes had taken place in your household economy? Madame Van Trichas had become acrid, whimsical, harsh. Her husband sometimes succeeded in drowning her voice by talking louder than she, but could not silence her. The petulant humor of this worthy dame was excited by everything. Nothing went right. The servants offended her every moment. Tattiments, her sister-in-law, who was not less irritable, replied sharply to her. M. Van Trichas naturally supported Lotch, his servant, as is the case in all good households, and this permanently exasperated Madame, who constantly disputed, discussed, and made scenes with her husband. "What on earth is the matter with us?" cried the unhappy burgomaster. "What is this fire that is devouring us? Are we possessed with the devil? Ah, Madame Van Trichas, you will end by making me die before you, and thus violate all the traditions of the family." The reader will not have forgotten the strange custom by which M. Van Trichas would become a widower and marry again, so as not to break the chain of descent. Meanwhile, this disposition of all minds produced other curious effects worthy of note. This excitement, the cause of which has so far escaped us, brought about unexpected physiological changes. Talents, hitherto unrecognized, betrayed themselves. Aptitudes were suddenly revealed. Artists, before commonplace, displayed new ability. Politicians and authors arose. Orators proved themselves equal to the most arduous debates, and on every question inflamed audiences which were quite ready to be inflamed. From the sessions of the council, this movement spread to the public political meetings, and a club was formed at Quiquendone, whilst 20 newspapers, the Quiquendone Signal, the Quiquendone Impartial, the Quiquendone Radical, and so on, written in an inflammatory style, raised the most important questions. But what about, you will ask, apropos of everything and of nothing, apropos of the Oudenarde Tower, which was falling, and which some wished to pull down and others to prop up, apropos of the police regulations issued by the council, which some obstinate citizens threatened to resist, apropos of the sweeping of the gutters, repairing the sewers, and so on. Nor did the enraged orators confine themselves to the internal administration of the town. Carried on by the current, they went further and essayed to plunge their fellow citizens into the hazards of war. Quiquendone had had for 800 or 900 years a casus belli of the best quality, but she had preciously laid it up like a relic, and there had seemed some probability that it would become effete and no longer serviceable. This was what had given rise to the casus belli. It is not generally known that Quiquendone, in this cozy corner of Flanders, lies next to the little town of Vergamen. The territories of the two communities are contiguous. Well, in 1185, some time before Count Baldwin's departure to the Crusades, a Vergamen cow, not a cow belonging to a citizen, but a cow which was common property, let it be observed, audaciously ventured to pasture on the territory of Quiquendone. This unfortunate beast had scarcely eaten 3 mouthfuls, but the offense, the abuse, the crime, whatever you will, was committed and duly indicted, for the magistrates at that time had already begun to know how to write. "We will take revenge at the proper moment," said simply Natales Van Trichas, the 32nd predecessor of the burgomaster of this story, "and the Vergamenians will lose nothing by waiting." The Vergamenians were forewarned. They waited, thinking, without doubt, that the remembrance of the offense would fade away with the lapse of time, and really, for several centuries, they lived on good terms with their neighbors of Quiquendone. But they counted without their hosts, or rather without this strange epidemic, which, radically changing the character of the Quiquendonians, aroused their dormant vengeance. It was at the club of the Rue Monstrelet that the truculent orator shut, abruptly introducing the subject to his hearers, inflamed them with the expressions and metaphors used on such occasions. He recalled the offense, the injury which had been done to Quiquendone, and which a nation, jealous of its rights, could not admit as a precedent. He showed the insult to be still existing, the wound still bleeding. He spoke of certain special head-shakings on the part of the people of Vergamen, which indicated in what degree of contempt they regarded the people of Quiquendone. He appealed to his fellow citizens, who, unconsciously perhaps, had supported this mortal insult for long centuries. He adjured the children of the ancient town to have no other purpose than to obtain a substantial reparation. And lastly, he made an appeal to all the living energies of the nation. With what enthusiasm these words, so new to Quiquendonian ears, were greeted may be surmised, but cannot be told. All the auditors rose, and with extended arms demanded war with loud cries. Never had the advocate Shut achieved such a success, and it must be avowed that his triumphs were not few. The burgomaster, the councillor, all the notabilities present at this memorable meeting would have vainly attempted to resist the popular outburst. Besides, they had no desire to do so, and cried as loud, if not louder, than the rest. "To the frontier! To the frontier!" As the frontier was but 3 kilometers from the walls of Quiquendone, it is certain that the Vergamenians ran a real danger, for they might easily be invaded without having had time to look about them. Meanwhile, Jos Liefrink, the worthy chemist, who alone had preserved his senses on this grave occasion, tried to make his fellow citizens comprehend that guns, cannon, and generals were equally wanting to their design. They replied to him, not without many impatient gestures, that these generals, cannons, and guns would be improvised, that the right and love of country sufficed and rendered a people irresistible. Hereupon the burgomaster himself came forward, and in a sublime harangue made short work of those pusillanimous people who disguised their fear under a veil of prudence, which veil he tore off with a patriotic hand. At this sally, it seemed as if the hall would fall in under the applause. The vote was eagerly demanded, and was taken amid acclamations. The cries of "To Vergamen," redoubled. "To Vergamen, to Vergamen." The burgomaster then took it upon himself to put the armies in motion, and in the name of the town he promised the honors of a triumph, such as was given in the times of the Romans to that one of its generals who should return victorious. Meanwhile, Jos Liefrink, who was an obstinate fellow and did not regard himself as beaten, though he really had been, insisted on making another observation. He wished to remark that the triumph was only accorded at Rome to those victorious generals who had killed 5,000 of the enemy. "Well, well," cried the meeting deliriously. "And as the population of the town of Vergamen consists of but 3,575 inhabitants, it would be difficult, unless the same person was killed several times." But they did not let the luckless logician finish, and he was turned out, hustled and bruised. "Citizens," said Pulmacher the grocer, who usually sold groceries by retail, "whatever this cowardly apothecary may have said, I engage by myself to kill 5,000 Vergamenians, if you will accept my services." 5,500, cried a yet more resolute patriot. 6,600, retorted the grocer. 7,000, cried Jean Orbidek, the confectioner of the Rue Hemmeling, who was on the road to a fortune by making whipped creams. "Adjudged," exclaimed the burgomaster Van Tricus, on finding that no one else rose on the bid. And this was how Jean Orbidek the confectioner became general-in-chief of the forces of Quiquendone. Chapter 12. in which Ijin, the assistant, gives a reasonable piece of advice, which is eagerly rejected by Dr. Ox. "Well, master," said Ijin next day, as he poured the pails of sulfuric acid into the troughs of the great battery. "Well," resumed Dr. Ox, "was I not right? See to what not only the physical developments of a whole nation, but its morality, its dignity, its talents, its political sense have come. It is only a question of molecules." "No doubt, but do you not think that matters have gone far enough, and that these poor devils should not be excited beyond measure?" "No, no," cried the doctor. "No, I will go on to the end." "As you will, master. The experiment, however, seems to me conclusive, and I think it time to close the valve." "You'd better," cried Dr. Ox. "If you attempt it, I'll throttle you." Chapter 13, in which it is once more proved that by taking high ground all human littlenesses may be overlooked. "You say," asked the burgomaster Van Trichas of the councillor Niklas. "I say that this war is necessary," replied Niklas firmly, "and that the time has come to avenge this insult." "Well, I repeat to you," replied the burgomaster tartly, "that if the people of Quiquendone do not profit by this occasion to vindicate their rights, they will be unworthy of their name. And as for me, I maintain that we ought, without delay, to collect our forces and lead them to the front." "Really, monsieur, really," replied Van Trichas, "and do you speak thus to me?" "To yourself, monsieur the burgomaster, and you shall hear the truth, unwelcome as it may be." "And you shall hear it yourself, councillor," returned Van Trichas in a passion, "for it will come better from my mouth than from yours. Yes, monsieur, yes, any delay would be dishonorable. The town of Quiquendone has waited 900 years for the moment to take its revenge, and whatever you may say, whether it pleases you or not, we shall march upon the enemy." "Ah, you take it thus," replied Niklas harshly. "Very well, monsieur, we will march without you if it does not please you to go. A burgomaster's place is in the front rank, monsieur. A burgomaster's place is in the front rank, monsieur. And that of a councillor also, monsieur." "You insult me by thwarting all my wishes," cried the burgomaster, whose fists seemed likely to hit out before long. "And you insult me equally by doubting my patriotism," cried Niklas, who was equally ready for a tussle. "I tell you, monsieur, that the army of Quiquendone shall be put in motion within 2 days. And I repeat to you, monsieur, that 48 hours shall not pass before we shall have marched upon the enemy." It is easy to see, from this fragment of conversation, that the two speakers supported exactly the same idea. Both wished for hostilities, but as their excitement disposed them to altercation, Niklas would not listen to Van Trichas, nor Van Trichas to Niklas. Had they been of contrary opinions on this grave question, had the burgomaster favored war and the councillor insisted on peace, the quarrel would not have been more violent. These two old friends gazed fiercely at each other. By the quickened beating of their hearts, their red faces, their contracted pupils, the trembling of their muscles, their harsh voices, it might be conjectured that they were ready to come to blows. But the striking of a large clock happily checked the adversaries at the moment when they seemed on the point of assaulting each other. "At last the hour has come," cried the burgomaster. "What hour?" asked the councillor. "The hour to go to the belfry tower." "It is true, and whether it pleases you or not, I shall go, monsieur." "And I too." "Let us go." "Let us go." It might have been supposed from these last words that a collision had occurred, and that the adversaries were proceeding to a duel, but it was not so. It had been agreed that the burgomaster and the councillor, as the two principal dignitaries of the town, should repair to the town hall, and there show themselves on the high tower which overlooked Quiquendone, that they should examine the surrounding country, so as to make the best strategetic plan for the advance of their troops. Though they were in accord on this subject, they did not cease to quarrel bitterly as they went. Their loud voices were heard resounding in the streets, but all the passers-by were now accustomed to this. The exasperation of the dignitaries seemed quite natural, and no one took notice of it. Under the circumstances, a calm man would have been regarded as a monster. The burgomaster and the councillor, having reached the porch of the belfry, were in a paroxysm of fury. They were no longer red, but pale. This terrible discussion, though they had the same idea, had produced internal spasms, and everyone knows that paleness shows that anger has reached its last limits. At the foot of the narrow tower staircase, there was a real explosion. Who should go up first? Who should first creep up the winding steps? Truth compels us to say that there was a tussle, and that the councillor Niklas, forgetful of all that he owed to his superior, to the supreme magistrate of the town, pushed Van Tricasse violently back and dashed up the staircase first. Both ascended, denouncing and raging at each other at every step. It was to be feared that a terrible climax would occur on the summit of the tower, which rose 357 feet above the pavement. The two enemies soon got out of breath, however, and in a little while, at the 80th step, they began to move up heavily, breathing loud and short. Then was it because of their being out of breath, their wrath subsided, or at least only betrayed itself by a succession of unseemly epithets. They became silent, and strange to say, it seemed as if their excitement diminished as they ascended higher above the town. A sort of lull took place in their minds. Their brains became cooler and simmered down like a coffee pot when taken away from the fire. Why? We cannot answer this why, but the truth is that, having reached a certain landing stage, 266 feet above ground, the two adversaries sat down, and really more calm, looked at each other without any anger in their faces. "How high it is," said the burgomaster, passing his handkerchief over his rubicund face. "Very high," returned the councillor. "Do you know that we have gone 14 feet higher than the church of St. Michael at Hamburg?" "I know it," replied the burgomaster, in a tone of vanity very pardonable in the chief magistrate of Quiquendone. The two notabilities soon resumed their ascent, casting curious glances through the loopholes pierced in the tower walls. The burgomaster had taken the head of the procession without any remark on the part of the councillor. It even happened that at about the 304th step, Van Tricasse being completely tired out, Niklas kindly pushed him from behind. The burgomaster offered no resistance to this, and when he reached the platform of the tower, said graciously, "Thanks, Niklas, I will do the same for you one day." A little while before it had been two wild beasts, ready to tear each other to pieces, who had presented themselves at the foot of the tower. It was now two friends who reached its summit. The weather was superb. It was the month of May, the sun had absorbed all the vapors. What a pure and limpid atmosphere! The most minute objects over a broad space might be discerned. The walls of Vergamen, glistening in their whiteness, its red, pointed roofs, its belfries shining in the sunlight, appeared a few miles off, and this was the town that was foredoomed to all the horrors of fire and pillage. The burgomaster and the councillor sat down beside each other on a small stone bench, like two worthy people whose souls were in close sympathy. As they recovered breath, they looked around, then, after a brief silence, "How fine this is!" cried the burgomaster. "Yes, it is admirable," replied the councillor. "Does it not seem to you, my good Van Tricasse, that humanity is destined to dwell rather at such heights than to crawl about on the surface of our globe?" "I agree with you, honest Niklas," returned the burgomaster. "I agree with you. You seize sentiment better when you get clear of nature. You breathe it in every sense. It is at such heights that philosophers should be formed, and that sages should live, above the miseries of this world." "Shall we go around the platform?" asked the councillor. "Let us go around the platform," replied the burgomaster. And the two friends, arm in arm, and putting, as formerly, long pauses between their questions and answers, examined every point of the horizon. The two friends, arm in arm. "It is at least 17 years since I have ascended the belfry tower," said Van Tricasse. "I do not think I ever came up before," replied Niklas, "and I regret it, for the view from this height is sublime. Do you see, my friend, the pretty stream of the Var as it winds among the trees? And beyond, the heights of St. Hermandad, how gracefully they shut in the horizon. Observe that border of green trees which nature has so picturesquely arranged. Ah, nature, nature, Niklos, could the hand of man ever hope to rival her? It is enchanting, my excellent friend, replied the counselor. See the flocks and herds lying in the verdant pastures, the oxen, the cows, the sheep. And the laborers going to the fields. You would say they were Arcadian shepherds, they only want a bagpipe. And over all this fertile country, the beautiful blue sky, which no vapor dims. Ah, Niklos, one might become a poet here. I do not understand why Saint Simeon Stylites was not one of the greatest poets of the world. It was because, perhaps, his column was not high enough, replied the counselor with a gentle smile. At this moment, the chimes of Quiquendone rang out. The clear bells played one of their most melodious airs. The two friends listened in ecstasy. Then in his calm voice, Van Trichas said, "But what, friend Niklos, did we come to the top of this tower to do?" "In fact," replied the counselor, "we have permitted ourselves to be carried away by our reveries." "What did we come here to do?" repeated the burgomaster. "We came," said Niklos, "to breathe this pure air, which human weaknesses have not corrupted." "Well, shall we descend, friend Niklos?" "Let us descend, friend Van Trichas." They gave a parting glance at the splendid panorama which was spread before their eyes. Then the burgomaster passed down first and began to descend with a slow and measured pace. The counselor followed a few steps behind. They reached the landing stage at which they had stopped on ascending. Already their cheeks began to redden. They tarried a moment, then resumed their descent. In a few moments, Van Trichas begged Niklos to go more slowly as he felt him on his heels, and it worried him. It even did more than worry him. For 20 steps lower down, he ordered the counselor to stop, that he might get on some distance ahead. The counselor replied that he did not wish to remain with his leg in the air to await the good pleasure of the burgomaster, and kept on. Van Trichas retorted with a rude expression. The counselor responded by an insulting allusion to the burgomaster's age, destined as he was, by his family traditions, to marry a second time. The burgomaster went down 20 steps more and warned Niklos that this should not pass thus. Niklos replied that, at all events, he would pass down first, and the space being very narrow, the two dignitaries came into collision and found themselves in utter darkness. The words blockhead and booby were the mildest which they now applied to each other. "We shall see, stupid beast," cried the burgomaster, "we shall see what figure you will make in this war, and in what rank you will march." "In the rank that precedes yours, you silly old fool," replied Niklos. Then there were other cries, and it seemed as if bodies were rolling over each other. What was going on? Why were these dispositions so quickly changed? Why were the gentle sheep of the tower's summit metamorphosed into tigers 200 feet below it? However this might be, the guardian of the tower, hearing the noise, opened the door, just at the moment when the two adversaries, bruised and with protruding eyes, were in the act of tearing each other's hair. Fortunately, they wore wigs. "You shall give me satisfaction for this," cried the burgomaster, shaking his fist under his adversary's nose. "Whenever you please," growled the counselor Niklos, attempting to respond with a vigorous kick. The guardian, who was himself in a passion, I cannot say why, thought the scene a very natural one. I know not what excitement urged him to take part in it, but he controlled himself, and went off to announce throughout the neighborhood that a hostile meeting was about to take place between the burgomaster Van Trichas and the counselor Niklos. Chapter 14, in which matters go so far that the inhabitants of Quiquendone, the reader, and even the author, demand an immediate denouement. The last incident proves to what a pitch of excitement the Quiquendonians had been wrought. The two oldest friends in the town, and the most gentle, before the advent of the epidemic, to reach this degree of violence. and that, too, only a few minutes after their old mutual sympathy, their amiable instincts, their contemplative habit, had been restored at the summit of the tower. On learning what was going on, Dr. Ox could not contain his joy. He resisted the arguments which Ijin, who saw what a serious turn affairs were taking, addressed to him. Besides, both of them were infected by the general fury. They were not less excited than the rest of the population, and they ended by quarreling as violently as the burgomaster and the councillor. Besides, one question eclipsed all others, and the intended duels were postponed to the issue of the Virgamenian difficulty. No man had the right to shed his blood uselessly when it belonged, to the last drop, to his country in danger. The affair was, in short, a grave one, and there was no withdrawing from it. The burgomaster Van Tricus, despite the warlike ardor with which he was filled, had not thought it best to throw himself upon the enemy without warning him. He had therefore, through the medium of the rural policeman, Hottering, sent to demand reparation of the Virgamenians for the offense committed in 1195 on the Quiquendonian territory. The authorities of Virgamen could not at first imagine of what the envoy spoke, and the latter, despite his official character, was conducted back to the frontier very cavalierly. Van Tricus then sent one of the aides-de-camp of the confectioner-general, citizen Hildevert Schumann, a manufacturer of barley sugar, a very firm and energetic man, who carried to the authorities of Virgamen the original minute of the indictment drawn up in 1195 by order of the burgomaster Natales Van Tricus. The authorities of Virgamen burst out laughing and served the aide-de-camp in the same manner as the rural policeman. The burgomaster then assembled the dignitaries of the town. A letter, remarkably and vigorously drawn up, was written as an ultimatum. The cause of quarrel was plainly stated, and a delay of 24 hours was accorded to the guilty city in which to repair the outrage done to Quiquendone. The letter was sent off, and returned a few hours afterwards, torn to bits, which made so many fresh insults. The Virgamenians knew of old the forbearance and equanimity of the Quiquendonians, and made sport of them and their demand, of their casus belli and their ultimatum. There was only one thing left to do, to have recourse to arms, to invoke the god of battles, and, after the Prussian fashion, to hurl themselves upon the Virgamenians before the latter could be prepared. This decision was made by the council in solemn conclave, in which cries, objurgations, and menacing gestures were mingled with unexampled violence. An assembly of idiots, a congress of madmen, a club of maniacs, would not have been more tumultuous. As soon as the declaration of war was known, General Jean Orbideck assembled his troops, perhaps 2,393 combatants from a population of 2,393 souls. The women, the children, the old men, were joined with the able-bodied males. The guns of the town had been put under requisition. 5 had been found, 2 of which were without cocks, and these had been distributed to the advance guard. The artillery was composed of the old culverin of the chateau, taken in 1339 at the attack on Quesnoy, one of the first occasions of the use of cannon in history, and which had not been fired off for 5 centuries. Happily for those who were appointed to take it in charge, there were no projectiles with which to load it. But such as it was, this engine might well impose on the enemy. As for sidearms, they had been taken from the Museum of Antiquities: flint hatchets, helmets, Frankish battle-axes, javelins, halberds, rapiers, and so on, and also in those domestic arsenals commonly known as cupboards and kitchens. But courage, the right hatred of the foreigner, the yearning for vengeance, were to take the place of more perfect engines, and to replace, at least it was hoped so, the modern mitrailleuses and breechloaders. The troops were passed in review. Not a citizen failed at the roll call. General Orbideck, whose seat on horseback was far from firm, and whose steed was a vicious beast, was thrown 3 times in front of the army, but he got up again without injury, and this was regarded as a favorable omen. The burgomaster, the councillor, the civil commissary, the chief justice, the schoolteacher, the banker, the rector, in short, all the notabilities of the town, marched at the head. There were no tears shed, either by mothers, sisters, or daughters. They urged on their husbands, fathers, brothers to the combat, and even followed them and formed the rear guard, under the orders of the courageous Madame Van Tricus. The crier Jean Mistral blew his trumpet. The army moved off and directed itself with ferocious cries towards the Oudenarde gate. At the moment when the head of the column was about to pass the walls of the town, a man threw himself before it. "Stop, stop, fools that you are," he cried. "Suspend your blows, let me shut the valve. You are not changed in nature. You are good citizens, quiet and peaceable. If you are so excited, it is my master Dr. Ox's fault. It is an experiment. Under the pretext of lighting your streets with oxyhydric gas, he has saturated." The assistant was beside himself, but he could not finish. At the instant that the doctor's secret was about to escape his lips, Dr. Ox himself pounced upon the unhappy Ygine in an indescribable rage, and shut his mouth by blows with his fist. It was a battle. The burgomaster, the councillor, the dignitaries, who had stopped short on Ygine's sudden appearance, carried away in turn by their exasperation, rushed upon the two strangers, without waiting to hear either the one or the other. Dr. Ox and his assistant, beaten and lashed, were about to be dragged, by order of Van Tricus, to the roundhouse, when Chapter 15, in which the denouement takes place. When a formidable explosion resounded, all the atmosphere which enveloped Quiquendone seemed on fire. A flame of an intensity and vividness quite unwonted shot up into the heavens like a meteor. Had it been night, this flame would have been visible for 10 leagues around. The whole army of Quiquendone fell to the earth, like an army of monks. Happily there were no victims. A few scratches and slight hurts were the only result. The confectioner, who, as chance would have it, had not fallen from his horse this time, had his plumes singed, and escaped without any further injury. The whole army of Quiquendone fell to the earth. What had happened? Something very simple, as was soon learned. The gasworks had just blown up. During the absence of the doctor and his assistant, some careless mistake had no doubt been made. It is not known how or why a communication had been established between the reservoir which contained the oxygen and that which enclosed the hydrogen. An explosive mixture had resulted from the union of these two gases, to which fire had accidentally been applied. This changed everything, but when the army got upon its feet again, Dr. Ox and his assistant Ygine had disappeared. Chapter 16, in which the intelligent reader sees that he has guessed correctly, despite all the author's precautions. After the explosion, Quiquendone immediately became the peaceable, phlegmatic, and Flemish town it formerly was. After the explosion, which indeed did not cause a very lively sensation, each one, without knowing why, mechanically took his way home, the burgomaster leaning on the councillor's arm, the advocate shut going arm in arm with Custos the doctor, France Nicklaus walking, with equal familiarity with Simon Carlert, each going tranquilly, noiselessly, without even being conscious of what had happened, and having already forgotten Vergamen and their revenge. The general returned to his confections, and his aide-de-camp to the barley sugar. Thus everything had become calm again. The old existence had been resumed by men and beasts, beasts and plants, even by the tower of Oudenarde Gate, which these explosions are sometimes astonishing, had set upright again. And from that time never a word was spoken more loudly than another, never a discussion took place in the town of Quiquendone. There were no more politics, no more clubs, no more trials, no more policemen. The post of the commissary Passoff became once more a sinecure, and if his salary was not reduced, it was because the burgomaster and the councillor could not make up their minds to decide upon it. From time to time, indeed, Passoff flitted, without anyone suspecting it, through the dreams of the inconsolable Tatiments. As for France's rival, he generously abandoned the charming Suzel to her lover, who hastened to wed her 5 or 6 years after these events. And as for Madame Van Tricus, she died 10 years later, at the proper time, and the burgomaster married Mademoiselle Pelagie Van Tricus, his cousin, under excellent conditions, for the happy mortal who should succeed him. Chapter 17, in which Dr. Ox's theory is explained. What then had this mysterious Dr. Ox done? Tried a fantastic experiment, nothing more. After having laid down his gas pipes, he had saturated first the public buildings, then the private dwellings, finally the streets of Quiquendone, with pure oxygen, without letting in the least atom of hydrogen. This gas, tasteless and odorless, spread in generous quantity through the atmosphere, causes, when it is breathed, serious agitation to the human organism. One who lives in an air saturated with oxygen grows excited, frantic, burns. You scarcely return to the ordinary atmosphere before you return to your usual state. For instance, the councillor and the burgomaster at the top of the belfry were themselves again, as the oxygen is kept, by its weight, in the lower strata of the air. But one who lives under such conditions, breathing this gas, which transforms the body physiologically as well as the soul, dies speedily, like a madman. It was fortunate, then, for the Quiquendonians, that a providential explosion put an end to this dangerous experiment and abolished Dr. Ox's gasworks. To conclude, are virtue, courage, talent, wit, imagination, are all these qualities or faculties only a question of oxygen? Such is Dr. Ox's theory, but we are not bound to accept it, and for ourselves we utterly reject it, in spite of the curious experiment of which the worthy old town of Quiquendone was the theatre. Master Zacharias. Chapter 1. A Winter Night. The city of Geneva lies at the west end of the lake of the same name. The Rhone, which passes through the town at the outlet of the lake, divides it into two sections, and is itself divided in the center of the city by an island placed in midstream. A topographical feature like this is often found in the great depots of commerce and industry. No doubt the first inhabitants were influenced by the easy means of transport which the swift currents of the rivers offered them, those roads which walk along of their own accord, as Pascal puts it. In the case of the Rhone, it would be the road that ran along. Before new and regular buildings were constructed on this island, which was enclosed like a Dutch galley in the middle of the river, the curious mass of houses, piled one on the other, presented a delightfully confused coupe d'oeil. The small area of the island had compelled some of the buildings to be perched, as it were, on the piles, which were entangled in the rough currents of the river. The huge beams, blackened by time and worn by the water, seemed like the claws of an enormous crab and presented a fantastic appearance. The little yellow streams, which were like cobwebs stretched amid this ancient foundation, quivered in the darkness as if they had been the leaves of some old oak forest, while the river engulfed in this forest of piles foamed and roared most mournfully. One of the houses of the island was striking for its curiously aged appearance. It was the dwelling of the old clockmaker, Master Zacharias, whose household consisted of his daughter Gerande, Aubert Thun, his apprentice, and his old servant Scholastique. There was no man in Geneva to compare in interest with this Zacharias. His age was past finding out. Not the oldest inhabitant of the town could tell for how long his thin, pointed head had shaken above his shoulders, nor the day when, for the first time, he had walked through the streets with his long white locks floating in the wind. The man did not live. He vibrated like the pendulum of his clocks. His spare and cadaverous figure was always clothed in dark colors. Like the pictures of Leonardo da Vinci, he was sketched in black. Gerande had the pleasantest room in the whole house, whence, through a narrow window, she had the inspiriting view of the snowy peaks of Jura, but the bedroom and workshop of the old man were a kind of cavern close on to the water, the floor of which rested on the piles. From time immemorial Master Zacharias had never come out except at meal times, and when he went to regulate the different clocks of the town. He passed the rest of his time at his bench, which was covered with numerous clockwork instruments, most of which he had invented himself. For he was a clever man. His works were valued in all France and Germany. The best workers in Geneva readily recognized his superiority and showed that he was an honor to the town by saying, to him belongs the glory of having invented the escapement. In fact, the birth of true clockwork dates from the invention which the talents of Zacharias had discovered not many years before. After he had worked hard for a long time, Zacharias would slowly put his tools away, cover up the delicate pieces that he had been adjusting with glasses, and stop the active wheel of his lathe. Then he would raise a trapdoor constructed in the floor of his workshop, and stooping down, used to inhale for hours together the thick vapors of the Rhone, as it dashed along under his eyes. He would raise the trapdoor constructed in the floor of his workshop. One winter's night, the old servant Scholastique served the supper, which, according to old custom, she and the young mechanic shared with their master. Master Zacharias did not eat, though the food carefully prepared for him was offered him in a handsome blue and white dish. He scarcely answered the sweet words of Gerande, who evidently noticed her father's silence, and even the clatter of Scholastique herself no more struck his ear than the roar of the river, to which he paid no attention. After the silent meal, the old clockmaker left the table without embracing his daughter or saying his usual good night to all. He left by the narrow door leading to his den, and the staircase groaned under his heavy footsteps as he went down. Gerande, Aubert, and Scholastique sat for some minutes without speaking. On this evening the weather was dull. The clouds dragged heavily on the Alps and threatened rain. The severe climate of Switzerland made one feel sad, while the south wind swept round the house and whistled ominously. "My dear young lady," said Scholastique at last, "do you know that our master has been out of sorts for several days? Holy Virgin, I know he has had no appetite, because his words stick in his inside, and it would take a very clever devil to drag even one out of him. My father has some secret cause of trouble that I cannot even guess," replied Gerande, as a sad anxiety spread over her face. "Mademoiselle, don't let such sadness fill your heart. You know the strange habits of Master Zacharias. Who can read his secret thoughts in his face? No doubt some fatigue has overcome him, but tomorrow he will have forgotten it and be very sorry to have given his daughter pain." It was Aubert who spoke thus, looking into Gerande's lovely eyes. Aubert was the first apprentice whom Master Zacharias had ever admitted to the intimacy of his labors, for he appreciated his intelligence, discretion, and goodness of heart, and this young man had attached himself to Gerande with the earnest devotion natural to a noble nature. Gerande was 18 years of age. Her oval face recalled that of the artless Madonnas whom veneration still displays at the street corners of the antique towns of Brittany. Her eyes betrayed an infinite simplicity. One would love her as the sweetest realization of a poet's dream. Her apparel was of modest colors, and the white linen which was folded about her shoulders had the tint and perfume peculiar to the linen of the church. She led a mystical existence in Geneva, which had not as yet been delivered over to the dryness of Calvinism. While night and morning she read her Latin prayers in her iron-clasped missal, Gerande had also discovered a hidden sentiment in Aubert Thun's heart, and comprehended what a profound devotion the young workman had for her. Indeed, the whole world in his eyes was condensed into this old clockmaker's house, and he passed all his time near the young girl when he left her father's workshop after his work was over. Old Scholastique saw all this, but said nothing. Her loquacity exhausted itself in preference on the evils of the times and the little worries of the household. Nobody tried to stop its course. It was with her as with the musical snuff-boxes which they made at Geneva. Once wound up, you must break them before you will prevent their playing all their airs through. Finding Gerande absorbed in a melancholy silence, Scholastique left her old wooden chair, fixed a taper on the end of a candlestick, lit it, and placed it near a small waxen Virgin, sheltered in her niche of stone. It was the family custom to kneel before this protecting Madonna of the domestic hearth, and to beg her kindly watchfulness during the coming night. But on this evening, Gerande remained silent in her seat. "Well, well, dear demoiselle," said the astonished Scholastique, "supper is over, and it is time to go to bed. Why do you tire your eyes by sitting up late? Ah, Holy Virgin, it's much better to sleep, and to get a little comfort from happy dreams. In these detestable times in which we live, who can promise herself a fortunate day?" Ought we not to send for a doctor for my father? Asked Gerund. A doctor, cried the old domestic. Has Master Zacharias ever listened to their fancies and pompous sayings? He might accept medicines for the watches, but not for the body. What shall we do? Murmured Gerund. Has he gone to work or to rest? Gerund, answered Aubert softly. Some mental trouble annoys your father, that is all. Do you know what it is, Aubert? Perhaps, Gerund. Tell us then, cried Scholastique eagerly, economically extinguishing her taper. For several days, Gerund, said the young apprentice, something absolutely incomprehensible has been going on. All the watches which your father has made and sold for some years have suddenly stopped. Very many of them have been brought back to him. He has carefully taken them to pieces. The springs were in good condition and the wheels well set. He has put them together yet more carefully, but despite his skill, they will not go. The devil's in it, cried Scholastique. Why say you so? Asked Gerund. It seems very natural to me. Nothing lasts forever in this world. The infinite cannot be fashioned by the hands of men.